Welcome, everyone, to this exciting entertainment update, where we dive into the captivating life of a true style icon and musical muse, a woman whose artistry and personal story both shimmered with creativity and occasionally darkened under the shadow of addiction. Get cozy and settle in because today we're exploring Jane Birkin's remarkable transformation. From a shy little girl in London to a head-turning figure of the 60s, swinging 60s, through periods of turmoil, and ultimately into an emblem of elegance whose name became associated with one of the most famous handbags in the world. This is going to be a journey filled with unpredictable twists, star-studded collaborations, and surprising beliefs that may just challenge everything you thought you knew. By the end, you'll have an intimate sense of who Jane Birkin truly was beyond the headlines, beyond the myths, and beyond that timeless bag that still bears her name. Jane Birkin was born in December 1946 in London, a city that was about to become the epicenter of cultural and musical revolutions. For all those who might imagine a star's childhood as glamorous from the start, Birkin's early days were quite ordinary in many respects. She was raised in Chelsea, a neighborhood that would one day be a synonym for style, but that, at the time, was simply her little corner of the world. From all accounts, she was a rather shy child, certainly not the flamboyant, confident persona that the public would one day see. Yet even shy children have dreams, and perhaps her quiet observation of people and places set the stage for her future in the arts. Just like a butterfly preparing in its cocoon, she was slowly gathering experiences that would carry her to the big screen and beyond. By the late 1960s, London had exploded into a cultural phenomenon dubbed the swinging London scene. The city was alive with imaginative fashion, boundary-breaking music, and a rebellious artistic energy that challenged tradition at every turn. Into this environment stepped Birkin, who began auditioning for film and television roles in both England and Los Angeles. Although she was still young, she had the intangible it factor, something that set her apart from a simple modeling hopeful or the average auditioning actress. In 1965, she nabbed a small but memorable role in The Knack and How to Get It, even if she wasn't credited on screen. The film was part of that whole vibrant era, brimming with a playful counterculture spirit. Yes, it was just a small part, but for Birkin, it was like dipping a toe into the ocean that she would soon learn to navigate. She scored bigger appearances in the 1966 films Blow Up and Kaleidoscope, each of which had its own special place in the annals of counterculture cinema. Blow Up was known for capturing the spirit of swinging London in a dreamy, surreal way, focusing on the life of a fashion photographer who stumbles upon what might be a murder mystery. Meanwhile, Kaleidoscope was brimming with the flamboyance of late 60s style. Neither film made Birkin a household name overnight, but they allowed her to refine her presence on screen and stand shoulder to shoulder with noted talents of the day. The camera liked her. Viewers were drawn to her mix of innocence and quiet boldness. Already she seemed an ideal figure for that era of boundary-pushing aesthetics and curiosity about new forms of expression. Her roles kept piling up. Soon she would appear in the psychedelic film Wonderwall and later in the erotic French thriller La Piscine in 1969. Both adding layers to her blossoming resume. Though her screen time might have varied, each project nudged her further into the public eye. She might have remained a minor figure in the cinematic universe had she not decided, as many budding stars do, to keep pushing her own boundaries. In fact, around that same time, she auditioned for a French film called Slogan, even though she didn't speak French. Many actors might have withdrawn from such an audition due to the language barrier, but Birkin did not. She jumped into the deep end, tried for the part, and got it, an early sign of the fearless approach that would characterize much of her career. And by taking this role, she found herself cast opposite Serge Gainsbourg, a towering figure in French music and pop culture. Serge Gainsbourg was something of a national icon in France, a singer-songwriter, poet, and provocateur who was just as known for his on-stage controversies as he was for his brilliant and often experimental compositions. Working with him on the film's theme song, La Chanson de Slogan, marked the first of many joint efforts between Gainsbourg and Birkin. Little could she have known at that moment how deeply intertwined their lives would become, professionally, romantically, and culturally. Once Slogan was finished, Birkin made the decision to settle in France permanently, effectively turning a page in her life story and beginning the chapter for which she would become truly famous. In 1969, their collaboration reached a fever pitch with the now infamous duet, Je t'aime, moi non plus. A bit of context, Gainsbourg had originally composed the song for Brigitte Bardot, who was at the time a massive sex symbol in France. However, Bardot's version of the track ended up shelved for various reasons. Enter Birkin, who re-recorded it alongside Gainsbourg with the kind of breathy, suggestive vocals that would turn the track into a cultural lightning rod. In an era when open discussion of sexuality was still considered daring, Je t'aime, moi non plus created shockwaves across Europe and beyond. It was banned on numerous radio stations in Italy, Spain, and the UK due to its overtly erotic nature. Critics and censors were horrified, but the public was intrigued. The single soared in sales and in the charts. In fact, it made UK chart history. On one particular week in October 1969, the same exact version by Birkin and Gainsbourg appeared on two different chart positions simultaneously, a surreal quirk that only added to the track's mystique. Of course, controversy can be rocket fuel for fame, and Birkin found herself rocketed into a new echelon of celebrity. People saw her as the free-spirited English girl who had taken Paris by storm, daring to record a scandalous song in French alongside one of the nation's most audacious icons. Meanwhile, she was also discovering the complexities of Gainsbourg's world. He was a creative genius with a rebellious spirit, writing some of the most beautifully crafted lyrics in the French language. Yet he was also no stranger to self-destructive behavior. Still, she once described the experience of being his muse and collaborator as extremely flattering, especially when she realized that so many of the unforgettable songs he wrote during this period were specifically created for her voice and persona. She wore that role proudly on stage, weaving her breathy vocals through Gainsbourg's poetic lines, enthralling audiences on albums and in performances. She stepped away from big-screen projects briefly, but returned with If Don Juan Were a Woman, a film that tested new levels of sensual exploration on screen. She also had a supporting role in the horror film Dark Places, alongside Christopher Lee, before rejoining Gainsbourg for his directorial debut, Je t'aime, moi non plus, which many described as a raw examination of gender ambiguity and fluid sexual identities. Predictably, the film was banned in the UK, once again, for an actress who had performed in one of the most controversial songs ever recorded. Ruffling the feathers of censors was all in a day's work. This time, she garnered a César Award nomination for Best Actress, a feat that underscored the fact that, beneath the controversy and hype, there was genuine talent at play. Yet for all her success and renown, Birkin's personal life carried more shadows than many realized. She has been forthright in interviews about her struggle with alcohol, revealing that for a period she would party until the early morning hours, lose track of time, and wake up not entirely sure what had happened the night before. By her own account, it became a relentless cycle. Up all night, home at dawn, sleeping in late, then resuming her life as though nothing was amiss, picking up her children from school, running errands, and generally appearing functional until nighttime descended and the bar scene called her back. This period spanned years, overshadowing her creative pursuits. Birkin points out that despite her heavy drinking, she refused to touch drugs because of her children, fearing the added danger that substances might bring. Even so, her alcohol dependency was enough of a challenge, threatening her health and her career. It was only when she reached a turning point in her life, particularly after her separation from Jacques Doyon, who was the father of her third child, that she realized she needed a dramatic change. She traveled to Sarajevo, met the writer Olivier Rollin, and channeled her focus into her singing career more seriously than ever. The realization that her voice and her creative energies were too important to sabotage eventually won out over her struggles with the bottle. Before she performed her first show in Sarajevo, she made a pact with herself to go about a week without touching alcohol or even smoking a cigarette. That might not sound monumental to some, but for Birkin, it represented a pivotal step toward reclaiming her health and self-determination. Over time, these sober weeks turned into sober months, especially leading up to any new performance or project. Incrementally, she managed to wrestle back control from her addiction, motivated by the love of her art and the awareness that continuing down her old path might have ended in tragedy. In interviews, Birkin's reflections on religion can surprise people who are used to public figures affirming or denying a single faith tradition. She's noted that she doesn't adhere to any specific religion, but believes in people instead, finding it fascinating how certain personalities, like Jesus Christ, garner devotion and worship even centuries after their time on earth. She marvels at the notion of prayer and the profound solace people find when they kneel and open their hearts to some greater force. While some might mistake these musings for devout Christianity, she clarifies that she's not a religious person. She admires parts of the story and acknowledges certain virtues in religious traditions. But she's also critical of the conflicts that religious extremism has sparked throughout history. If her beliefs were multifaceted, so too were her relationships. At 17 years old, she married the composer John Barry, famous for scoring many of the iconic James Bond films. This was not a fling or a passing infatuation. They even had a daughter together. However, the marriage didn't last. By 1968, the couple had separated. That same year, Birkin launched into her passionate, highly publicized affair with Serge Gainsbourg. Their relationship would last about 12 years, and though paparazzi often speculated that they had married in secret, the truth is that they never officially tied the knot. They did, however, bring a daughter into the world. Gainsbourg, for all his notoriety, was a devoted father in his own way, and their daughter would one day follow a creative path as well. Eventually, Birkin and Gainsbourg parted ways in 1980. Some said it was the logical outcome of two strong-willed artists whose passions sometimes clashed, while others believed Gainsbourg's drinking habit and unpredictable behavior wore too heavily on their bond. Whatever the case, Birkin then began a relationship with the French director Jacques Doyon, and together they had another daughter in 1982. This, too, was a significant chapter in her life. Doyon challenged her to explore new depths as an actress, and she threw herself into both motherhood and performance, hoping perhaps to find a lasting equilibrium. Yet the relationship ended in the 1990s, with an observer once noting that Doyon couldn't compete with the lingering grief Birkin felt for Gainsbourg after his death in 1991. From that point onward, Birkin largely chose to live alone, although she briefly shared companionship with writer Olivier Rollin. Despite these heartbreaks, she found a sort of stability in her beloved Paris, a city she has called home since the late 1960s and has never truly planned to leave. One of the most enduring parts of her public identity has little to do with her music or film roles and everything to do with a chance encounter on a flight. In 1983, the chief executive of Hermès, Jean-Louis Dumas, happened to be seated next to Birkin on a flight from Paris to London. During this flight, Birkin attempted to place her straw bag in the overhead compartment, only to have all its contents spill out onto the aisle. She bemoaned the difficulty of finding a practical but stylish leather weekend bag. Seizing the opportunity, Dumas took mental notes, and in 1984, he designed a new bag specifically for her, a supple black leather creation that combined functionality with timeless French craftsmanship. Thus, the Birkin bag was born. At first, Birkin embraced the bag wholeheartedly, piling her things into it. Ironically, after a while, she realized she tended to stuff it with too many items, making it heavier and bulkier than she cared for. But the Birkin bag was already on its way to becoming an international sensation. In the decades since, the bag has evolved into one of the ultimate symbols of luxury, with prices ranging from the tens of thousands all the way up to $500,000 for rare, exotic skin editions. It became the holy grail for certain fashion collectors, the darling of wealthy celebrities, and a cultural reference point in shows like Sex and the City. To carry a Birkin was to announce one's arrival into a certain elite echelon. However, Birkin herself was ambivalent about the bag's star status. Though she recognized the artistry and was flattered by its naming, her conscience was pricked when she learned about the questionable methods used to harvest exotic leathers. In 2015, she penned an open letter requesting that Hermès remove her name from the product until more ethical processes could be ensured. This made international headlines, as the fashion world had never quite seen a name-brand muse denounce the product that had become so famously tied to her own identity. Hermès swiftly responded, reassuring Birkin that they had implemented improved standards. Satisfied, she allowed her name to remain on the bag, but the episode stands as a testament to her principles. Despite being at the heart of an opulent fashion phenomenon, she was willing to risk personal and financial blowback to champion an ethical cause. Jane Birkin's life has been colorful and occasionally tumultuous, woven through with star-crossed partnerships, battles with personal demons, exhilarating creative accomplishments, and moral convictions that have put her at odds with the very industries that helped make her famous. Reflecting on her journey, it's hard not to be impressed by her capacity for reinvention. From the shy Chelsea girl to a darling of Paris, from nights lost to alcohol to a reawakened commitment to her artistic craft, from ephemeral roles in 1960s counterculture films to multi-year creative collaborations with Gainsbourg, from an accidental slip of personal items on an airplane to lending her surname to the world's most talked-about handbag, Jane Birkin's trajectory is the stuff of legend. Her relationships illustrate how thoroughly she lived and felt her experiences. With John Barry, she learned about show business at a young age. With Serge Gainsbourg, she danced on the edge of controversy and soared to the heights of musical stardom, forging a partnership that would define French pop culture for an entire generation. With Jacques Doyon, she explored new layers of film artistry and motherhood. Through it all, she balanced the demands of public life with her desire for authenticity, often paying a steep emotional cost. Indeed, many watchers say that Gainsbourg's passing cast a long shadow over her heart, one that perhaps no subsequent partner could completely dispel. Birkin was as frank about her flaws, her struggles with addiction, as she was about her triumphs, whether singing Gainsbourg's provocative lyrics or making comedic appearances in unassuming indie films. She loved her daughters and placed their well-being above all else, even in the midst of some questionable personal choices. She had her beliefs about religion or the lack thereof, emphasizing her faith in people, in empathy, in human connection, rather than in creeds or doctrines. In the face of worshipful fans or unrelenting paparazzi, she remained resolutely herself, neither fully rebellious nor passively compliant, forging a middle path that was entirely her own. For someone who admitted to being shy in her youth, she became a mesmerizing performer, both on the stage and on screen, comfortable confronting taboos or stepping into roles that tested the boundaries of mainstream cinema. She lent her voice to songs that set the world ablaze with scandal and admiration. She also proved her comedic chops in lighter fare and her dramatic range in sobering roles that earned her critical accolades. It's rare to see such versatility in the performing arts, particularly for someone who was never formally trained to handle the controversies that came her way. But Jane Birkin found her way through, forging a distinctive place for herself in the industry. And of course, no conversation about Birkin would be complete without a final word on that eponymous bag. Even if she ended up disenchanted with carrying it, the fact remains that her name is immortalized in high fashion's pantheon. Countless celebrities, from Victoria Beckham to the Kardashians to numerous royals around the globe, have shown off their Birkins as status symbols. Yet the woman who inspired that coveted item always seems somewhat removed from the hype. That may be what makes her story so fascinating. She was not simply an image to be consumed, she was a flesh and blood artist, feeling every high and low along the way. In remembering her today, we might also take note of how she continued to evolve, stepping into philanthropic engagements and publicly speaking her mind on issues ranging from animal welfare to the role of women in creative industries. She accepted certain accolades with humility and never seemed entirely comfortable being lauded as an icon. And that humility, combined with her bohemian spirit, might well be what has kept fans fascinated for decades. She's a reminder that the most interesting and iconic figures often have complexities running beneath the surface, inner dialogues that don't always match the glamorous or scandalous headlines. So, what can we take away from Jane Birkin's story? If nothing else, it's that art and life are never static. She soared to prominence in a time of enormous cultural shift, made headlines with her sensual collaborations, navigated multiple relationships and personal crises, and still managed to emerge as a symbol of refined cool. She reconciled with her own past, overcame destructive habits, and demonstrated that meaningful change is possible, even in midlife, proving that you can reinvent yourself as many times as necessary. She wrestled with existential questions of faith and identity, considered how best to support her children while continuing to push boundaries, and found that while fame can be exhilarating, it can also isolate you if you're not anchored in authentic relationships and genuine self-reflection. That's why, when you think of Jane Birkin, you might recall her soulful duet with Serge Gainsbourg. You might visualize that legendary bag, or you might remember tabloid stories of her wild nights. But peel back those layers and you'll discover the beating heart of a woman who learned how to reorient her life, who believed in the power of music and film, and who held on to her sense of independence, even when faced with the many illusions and trappings of stardom. Hopefully, you've found this retelling of Jane Birkin's life and career not just informative, but also inspiring. She may have flirted with the brink of self-destruction, and she certainly broke social norms with her scandalous song releases and cinematic roles. But she also showed how true creativity, propelled by self-awareness, can overcome tremendous odds. Thank you for tuning in and sharing in this celebration of a woman whose story is at once timeless, controversial, and deeply human. If you've enjoyed discovering these layers of Jane Birkin's life, from her earliest days in Chelsea to her dizzying nights in Paris, and from her struggles with addiction to her ultimate embrace of a more balanced, empowered existence, then stay tuned. We invite you to subscribe, drop a comment, and keep an eye out for our next videos, where we'll continue exploring the stories of other captivating figures who've graced the world stage. Until then, may you carry a bit of Jane Birkin's bold spirit with you, daring to reinvent yourself whenever necessary, and never being afraid to speak up for what you believe in. We'll see you again soon for more unforgettable tales from the crossroads of fame, art, and personal discovery.